Hi everyone, it's Paul Tilley and welcome back to the third and final component of Unit 1. And today we're looking at organizational structure and culture in organizations. This reflects the material covered in Chapter 3, and in it we'll identify different project management structures and understand their strengths and weaknesses. We'll distinguish three types of different matrix structures and understand the strengths and weaknesses. We'll describe how project management officers, PMOs, can support and improve project execution. We'll understand organizational and project considerations should be considered when we think about an appropriate management structure relative to the project. We'll appreciate the significant role of organizational culture and how it plays out in managing projects. And we're going to interpret the culture of an organization and understand the interaction between project management structure and culture in the organization. First of all, we're going to take a look at various organizational structures, okay? If we think about organizational structures, this is how organizations are set up in order to achieve their goals. And there's a number of common formats that are used. The first and probably most common format is something called a functional organizational structure. It involves having a board of directors at the very top of the organization that hires a manager called a chief executive, and that chief executive is responsible to the board of directors and supervises the entire organization. The chief executive will have sub-managers or middle managers that would normally be called vice presidents. So we have, in this particular example, a vice president of marketing, a vice president of production, vice president of finance, and a vice president of research. So you could have any number of vice presidents, but effectively functional activities are broken out within the organization, and there is a responsible manager for each of the functions. So marketing, for example, would encompass market research, sales, aftermarket support, and advertising. And vice president of production will be responsible for things that are production related, such as logistics, outsourcing, distribution, warehousing, and manufacturing. Finance would be responsible for financial activities, and he or she would have people under him responsible for accounting services, contracting, investments, and employee benefits, the HR function. And we would have potentially a vice president for research. So we broke out a division for research, would include things like new product development, testing, research, labs, and quality control. So this is a common format that we see in most North American organizations. The basic strengths of this is the projects are developed within the basic functional structure and require no disruption or change to that structure. It enables the development of in-depth knowledge and intellectual capital. So the people within the marketing division would be experts in marketing. Finance would be experts in finance, and so on. It allows for standard career paths. Project teams members only report their duties as needed while maintaining maximum connection with their functional group. So if we think about within the functional group, someone who starts off in the marketing department would look for advancing their career within marketing, moving up to the vice president of marketing and potentially the CEO of the company. Some of the weaknesses of this structure, and they're well known, functional setups create what we call siloing, which is a big problem in North American companies where I'm familiar with my area and I'm only interested in my area. So I don't have a big picture perspective, right? So siloing makes it difficult to achieve cross-functional cooperation. There's a lack of a customer focus because, again, I'm just focused on my area. Projects generally take longer to complete due to structural problems, slower communications, lack of direct ownership of the project. It's shared amongst different divisions, for example. So if we got a R&D are responsible for it, what do the people in finance care about that, for example? And projects may be sub-optimized due to the varying interests. Obviously, we've seen an example of that. So this is one of the biggest problems that we see with the functional structure, is that it creates divisions within an organization that are beneficial in one respect, but hindering it in another. We also have something called a project organizational structure, and this kind of structure is designed around projects and is designed to help overcome some of those basic issues that arise in a functional structure. So project organizations are those that are set up with their exclusive focus aimed at running projects. So if you're a project organization, this works. So we can see we have the functional structure above it. So you can see that the board of directors, chief executives, and the vice presidents are there in place. But we have a vice president of projects, and that then is flowed out through the various divisions. So the vice president of marketing, production, finance, and research would be involved in project A, and they would also be involved in project B. Now, obviously there are some strengths to this. It assigns authority solely to a project manager, so specific project. So each little project is kind of like its own little business. Leads to improved communication amongst the organization and among functional groups, again, because everybody's involved. Promotes effective and speedy decision making. It promotes creation of cadres of project management experts, and it encourages rapid response to marketing opportunities, again, because it's project focused. However, the downside is it sets up and maintains a team, and by the nature, a team is a temporary thing. But, constantly setting up these teams and getting all this organized is expensive and time-consuming. There's also the potential for project team members to develop a loyalty to a given project rather than the overall organization. So it's your project, and you're going to do everything you can in order to make that succeed. It's difficult to maintain a pooled supply of intellectual capital. Again, people are dedicated to projects. Concern amongst project team members about their future once the project ends is ever present. Now, project teams are often found in very large, particularly very large and innovative organizations. Boeing, for example, sets up project teams. So there's a project team for the 737 MAX. There's a project team for the 777. So different plane projects will have different groups. We also have something called the matrix structure. And what the matrix structure tries to do is to take the best of both. We have the basic structure that we saw in the previous editions. Okay, so we saw the board of directors, chief executive, the various vice presidents. We have also, down from a project perspective, we have project alpha and project beta there. So effectively what we're doing is creating, we're pulling from the marketing group, pulling from production group, pulling from finance group, pulling from research group, resources, people, for example. So there will be 2 people from marketing dedicated to the project. We can see that people are pulled from the various divisions into a project. Now, the strength of this is it's really well suited to a dynamic, high-tech type environment. It emphasizes the dual importance of the project and the functionality, promotes coordination, and maximizes what we have in terms of scarce resources. But it comes with some weaknesses too. The dual hierarchy means 2 bosses, and one of the basic functions of management control, or one of the basic tenets of management control, is that you have one boss. And in a hierarchy, you really have 2 bosses, a project-oriented boss and a functional boss. And sometimes that can create tension because what one wants and what the other one wants may be different. It requires significant time to be spent negotiating or sharing of critical resources. So how do we dedicate 1.5? Well, there's obviously 1.5 persons means that half a person is on another project or involved with something else. It can be frustrating for workers caught between competing demands. Obviously, that's a big problem. So, what do we try to do in order to kind of smooth out all these bumps? Well, in order to smooth out the bumps, we need project management officers. And this is really a centralized unit within the organization or department that oversees and improves the management of projects. So these offices are really geared for taking care of projects. Seen as a center of excellence for project management, many organizations exist as a separate organizational entity or subunit that assists the project manager in achieving the project goals by providing direct expertise in vital project management duties such as scheduling, resource allocation, monitoring, and controlling the project. So these are subgroups or an entity set up within the organization that helps the project move ahead. We also have this issue of organizational culture. And organizational culture is something that's hard to see, but you'll certainly know it's there. Organizational culture really describes how an organization has developed its own outlook, its operating policies, its procedures, patterns of thinking, attitudes, norms, and behavior. These can be written and they can be unwritten. And the unwritten ones are the scary ones because nobody knows until they've been there long enough. So if we look at organizational culture, it really makes the unwritten rules of behavior or norms that are used to shape and guide behavior within the organization They're shared by some subset of the organizational members. They're taught to all new members of the company, and you really need to figure it out quickly whenever you move to an organization, because as I say, unwritten stuff you need to figure out. How do cultures form? Well, a company's culture, particularly during its early years, is tied to the personality, background, values of the founder. The founder has a big influence. As the founder moves further into the past, new cultures or new ways of thinking will develop. So the founders undoubtedly exert a powerful influence over culture. The industry characteristics also will begin to shape. So industry characteristics and demands act to force to create similarities among organizational cultures. Banks, for example, operate within a clear set of government rules that contributes to the culture. In terms of project management, culture has a big impact. So in every company, project management happens within a much larger context of the company's organizational culture. So an organizational culture can affect how the project management happens. Projects are most aligned with organizational culture. They're likely to be much smoother to implement and much more likely to succeed. Projects that aren't so well aligned with the culture are less likely to succeed and present a lot more problems. Understanding the organizational cultures and its relationships to project management can help companies figure out which projects to pursue, which ones to set aside. So how can culture affect project management? Well, departmental interaction is going to be affected. How often we talk to one another, how good the communication is between the various levels, particularly in terms of the structural setups that we have in organizations, be it functional matrix or so on, project-based. Employee commitment to goals, do we have high levels of commitment within this organization? Is that part of the culture? Is there significant project planning? Is our culture geared for planning? Is our culture geared for success? Is success critically important? Is that the most important thing? Will that force success? And do we have a performance evaluation method that is based on success within the project and towards achieving what we state as the project goals? So those are some of the issues that we need to concern ourselves in this very first unit. Again, if you have any questions, please let me know. Thanks.